Okay, well, Sakura already provided me with a segue because she started talking about the Devonshire Initiative, which I'll come to in a minute. I thought it was kind of interesting that I was asked to speak on the corporate social responsibility piece, because for a long time I completely avoided reading anything about that, because to me it was just like that poster over there. It was pretending everything's fine and no need to discuss. So I saw corporate social responsibility as a dodge, as something that was enabling the public to not see what was really happening with mining. So I did kind of belatedly start to take a little bit more interest in that whole aspect of mining. And one of the projects, so I started trying to do some research on one of these 3 projects that Sakura mentioned that was set up under the Harper government. They were called public-private collaborations between, it was actually a tripartite. It was the initially CETA and then Foreign Affairs, so the Canadian government, a mining industry, and a development NGO. So the one I started looking at was Plan Canada, who partnered with a company called IAMGold Inc., and they were running a project in Burkina Faso, which is a small, very impoverished country in West Africa. Canada is now the largest foreign investor in Burkina Faso. Canadian firms operate 3 mining companies and have numerous exploration companies running around in Burkina Faso. So we have a disproportionate presence in this country. But when I started, so Plan Canada, I don't know if some images come to mind when I say Plan Canada, especially just before Christmas. There's a lot of ads on TV, like pay for a goat, and some family will get a goat. So, and then they had their Because I Am a Girl campaign. So that was when I first started being curious about Plan Canada, was because having worked in the NGO sector, I know that NGOs are always struggling for funds, and I'm sure MISN and Decolonize Now sort of live on a shoestring, right? But Plan Canada and Because I Am a Girl started having billboards on Yonge Street, ads in the TTC system, even driving around the countryside I would see ads. So this very visible public presence, and I got really curious about how are they funding this? Well, as a result of the Devonshire Initiative, they partnered with IAMGold and ended up with running a $7 million project. That was just one piece of their program. They were also, it turned out, partnering or getting funding from from the corporate sector generally. So I started thinking of Plan Canada and certain other NGOs. I started calling them the corporate NGOs because I thought they were actually a quite different category of NGOs than some other ones. I started looking at board of directors. So interestingly, the board of directors of Plan Canada, out of about 9 or 10 board members, only 1 had any background in development work. None of them had any background in gender issues or human rights. They were mining executives and finance sector executives and corporate law firm executives. Those are the people sitting on the board of directors of Plan Canada. And at the time that, after the Devonshire Initiative, when they made this deal between Plan Canada and IAMGold Inc., the board of directors of Plan was a guy named Benoit Lassalle. Has anyone heard of him? He's a businessman. He actually was the CEO of Samafo Inc., which was a Canadian company that owned the 2nd largest gold mine in Burkina Faso at the time, after IAMGold. So he's a gold mining guy. He's the chair, the directors of Plan Canada. Subsequently, he now got out of mining and he's now in solar energy, and he also got his company landed a $50 million contract to build a solar energy plant in Burkina Faso. At the same time, he was also the chair of the Canada-Africa Council, which is a business council. So basically, trying to promote business between Canada and Africa. So you start to see Plan Canada as basically an arm of the corporate sector, the corporate community in Canada, that's running a really glossy, positive-looking NGO, Plan Canada, promoting the idea of gender rights and rights for girls that looks really appealing to the public. In the end, the project that they're running, it's just finishing up now, so I haven't had access to the most recent figures. But about 2 years ago, when I was crunching the numbers through access to information, which is the only way I could get them, interestingly, Plan Canada wouldn't, they initially agreed for an interview with me, but when I gave them my questions, they abruptly canceled the meeting with me. And one of the questions that I'd asked, my last question was, has Plan Canada taken a position on the campaign in Burkina Faso for an increase in the community royalties paid by mining companies from 0.5% to 1%. So this was I'm sure that was the question that caused them to cancel the meeting with me. So it's also an example of how difficult it is for academics to get access to these, what goes on behind closed doors, right? So getting access to the board of directors, conversations when they were working out this project in Burkina. What happened in Burkina Faso is that this project was supposed to educate 10,000 youth, teenagers, vocational training. 2 years ago when I looked, there had been 24 kids who had graduated and got jobs, 24, and out of them only 8 had jobs above the poverty line, which was at that time about $60 a month in Burkina Faso. And the other thing, the other connection here in that story is that at the big iron gold mine in Burkina, 16,000 people were displaced for that mine. And many of them were artisanal miners who were making about $60 a day, right? So you have people who are actually making a livelihood, and yet this project that's coming in supposedly to generate jobs is generating fewer jobs than were lost through the displacement because of the mine, and the incomes are much lower. So that's what is being marketed as corporate social responsibility. That project was labeled by the government and by the mining industry as a corporate social responsibility project. So I guess just to wind up, and I guess the displacement is another piece. So the other thing that's happening is that forced relocations is really bad reputational risk for mining companies. So they've also started partnering with another new genre of NGOs who are managing the relations with communities. So we have new NGOs that are actually in the employ of Canadian mining firms and are trying to find more palatable ways of working with mining-affected communities and do the relocations in a more amenable manner. And so what I see happening with corporate social responsibility is that it's trying to take technical solutions, trying to create technical solutions, and sometimes what I call social technology solutions, to what are fundamentally political problems. So it allows the companies to depoliticize the real question of should Canadian companies be present in these communities at all. It diverts attention from the real power disparity between the mining company and the local communities. And so it puts this glossy sheen over it. I think those were the main, and I guess the last thing I thought about corporate social responsibility is that it was fundamentally a rebranding strategy that the mining industry used after the World Bank. The World Bank did a big extractive industry review in the early 2000s. So there was this culmination of mass civil society discontent about how mining companies were operating, and the companies realized they needed to rebrand themselves in a positive way. So CSR became their strategy for rebranding themselves, and also it was an approach to managing the political discontent and political unrest in a way that would allow companies to look like they were actually meeting responding to the complaints. But it's a very much a managed approach that, thank you.